Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. I think we'll wait for a couple of minutes to start off. Hi, good evening everyone joining from India. Good afternoon everyone joining from the UK. My name is Swapnil. I'm Director of Sales at Provakil. I've got Shashwat along with us. Shashwat is a co-founder at Provakil. Thank you for joining us again. The topic today we wanted to cover was on how to choose the right digital contracting tool. All right. So the brief agenda we want to cover today is in terms of what is a contracting tool, when should you look for it, what is the scope you should do for it, what are the checklist, what are the types of implementations there are in the market, and how to avoid certain pitfalls in terms of the entire process of choosing the right contracting tool. So we'll have a quick poll which we'll run to understand the audience today we've got on the call. So Anirudh, if you can quickly run through the poll, we can quickly run that. Meanwhile, it's going to be a session. We'll talk about the entire agenda, and then you also, in the interim, if you have any questions, if you want us to elaborate on something in details, feel free to drop in your questions at the bottom. There's a Q&A section. In case you want to ask a live question, you can also raise your hands. Probably if it's in the flow itself, we can take those questions as well. After the call, so we'll cover it's going to be an interactive session where we'll understand and share our experiences. After the session, we'll also be sharing a detailed buyer's guide, which will kind of help you in terms of understanding and having nitty-gritties of what to look for, when to look for, and all of those things, right, in the buyer's guide. So we'll drop the link in the chat box below, along with the recording of the session as well. Post the call, feel free to reach out to us in case you want to further understand, you want to deep dive as to what is a CLM, can it be implemented in your organization, if it's already implemented, if you're facing any challenges or anything of that sort, right? So feel free to connect with us post the call as well, and as well as on LinkedIn. We'll also be sharing a Calendly link in case you want us to block a session with us to understand the offerings which Provakil has in this space. We'd be happy to kind of walk you through and give you a brief demo as well as learnings which we've learned so far in the market. So great. So I think we've got Shashwat. Shashwat is a co-founder at Provakil. Shashwat, so I think the agenda today, like you know, right? So with the work from home happening, with the pandemic happening, there's been a lot of activity in terms of digitization in the organizations. So we wanted to, and the more and more customers we've spoken to in the last year or so, we've realized that most of the organizations take a very longer period in terms of evaluating. It becomes very complex, complicated for them to choose a tool. They end up hiring consultants in most of the case for doing all of this activity, right? So we thought, is there a way where we can break it down, make it simple, streamline the entire process? So that is what we wanted to understand from you in today's call. So welcome, Shashwat.
Thank you, Swapnil. And I think this is something that we've in our interaction with a lot of customers and a lot of people in the legal sector, we have encountered this a lot, that people are keen to understand a lot about contracting systems and what these systems are and what do they do. So I think this is a quite timely session for us to sort of demystify and break it down for the audience. I'm quite looking forward to it. Have you guys run the poll yet? Anirudh, have we done the poll yet, so that we can get started, Swapnil?
Yeah, just a second. Anirudh, if you could share the screen in terms of if you've got the results. Great. So I think we've got the question we'd asked in the poll was what category describes you the best in terms of the CLM journey inside your organization. So we have, in fact, we have all the responses around the participants where they currently manage their contracts manually. So it means they're planning to go digital. So they're looking for a system to be implemented. So that's a good sign. So I think this will be pretty much helpful in terms of the session we'll walk you through in terms of what is a CLM, right? So let's start with the definition, right? So Shashwat, there are a lot of buzzwords around CLM. Some call it AI driven, some call it document management system, some call it contract management system, some call it contract lifecycle management. So what essentially, if you could break it down for us in a very simple layman language as to what is a CLM and what is the purpose why one should go for a CLM?
Yeah, no. So software, it's quite simple, right? In my view, this is one of the most important core systems that a company can implement, right? If you essentially look at it, right, a company is, and again, this is a cliche, right? A company is the sum of its contracts, right? So you end up doing contracts with vendors, with the customers, with employees, right? And essentially, what a business then constitutes is these neatly drawn relationships, right, where the terms of the relationships are defined through these contracts, right? And these contracts could be really simple, or these could be really, really, complicated and with a lot of depth built in, right? Now, since this is one of those core things, and traditionally all businesses have been doing contracts. I mean, for as long as businesses have existed, contracts have existed. If you look at contract lifecycle management systems, now, if you take the contracting process and you digitize the entire process, a system that enables you to digitize that entire process, where everything that you're doing with regards to your contracts is then brought onto a digital platform, which enables each of these stages of contracting. That, in my view, is a contract lifecycle management system. So when you talk about contract, there's the initiation phase where somebody initiates the contract. There is an authoring phase where somebody will, basis the requirements that have come in, somebody will actually author the contract. There are review and negotiations that happen, right? So people end up reviewing, adding comments, making changes into those contracts. Finally, there are approvals that happen in the contracting flow. Once everything is done, then the contract needs to get executed. And once the contract is executed, even beyond that, there are compliances that those contracts have put in place. There are obligations that are there, and contracts have to be renewed. They have to be amended, and so on and so forth, right? So if you look at this entire process flow from the contract initiation till the life cycle management of it, which is the obligations and the renewals, right? That entire workflow, right? That entire process, digitizing that entire process is what a contract lifecycle management system has to do, right? So that's, in my view, the definition of a contract lifecycle management, which looks at the whole lifecycle of the contract and then digitizes that entire process and makes it digital with a lot more information then available throughout this process and even post the process, right? So as a company, you have, so if I were to talk about it, right? I mean, if I were to talk about what does it do, it digitizes your contracts, right? So not just the contract that you're going to do now, but also contracts that you've done in the past, right? So system that you're implementing has to digitize those contracts, have to bring them onto a digital platform, right? It has to be a repository. It has to be a repository of those documents that you've signed, executed, and it has to be a searchable, smart repository where you can look up documents based on their metadata, look up documents based on different criteria, right? So it has to be a smart repository of storing those documents and managing those documents where different stakeholders, right? With contracts, you have different stakeholders in the company. You have finance, you have legal, you have sales, you have operations. Everybody is involved in the entire contracting process. And so different people might have different use cases, right? So the system should enable them to look up for information that they're looking for readily, right? And that is one of the other key aspects of the CLM system, right? It should enable review and negotiations, right? So contracting, for people who've done contracting on the call, they know that, you know, end of the day, contracts are about reading through the language and figuring out what it means, putting multiple lenses to different clauses. Then there are differences of opinion that you could have with internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. How do you reconcile those differences of opinion? How do you bring everybody, including internal and external stakeholders, onto the same page, right? So the system should be able to enable all of that, and that becomes an extremely important part of the contract management system or the contract lifecycle management system. Finally, I mean, once you have signed contracts, you have executed contracts, you better follow what those contracts say. So the contract should send you timely reminders for obligations that you have. It should send you updates on key dates, renewals, and all of those things, right? So that's another aspect of the contract management system. And then if you look at it as a whole, the system should give you a holistic 360-degree view of what the organization is doing, what are our obligations, what are the, what is our sales pipeline like. Everything should be clearly visible in a contract management system, and it should really enable a smooth visibility into the business operations. So again, a larger expanded scope of what the definition should be, but that is, in my view, what a contracting system should be.
Great. I think you've hit it right on the nail, that it has to digitize everything, because at today's world, there's so many uncertainties. Businesses are getting dynamic. There are sales teams which are running on the ground. There are hundreds of contracts they want to execute. So there has to be a way where in the today's world where you can order something and get it in 15 minutes, can the contracts also happen like that, right? Can the contracts be also something where I just send a contract to my legal team and it gets done in a day's time or so? And all of the inputs are happening, and I don't have to follow up with all of them, right? So that'd be great. So you're right. I think digitization is a need. That digitization helps in terms of bringing all the stakeholders together on a single platform, brings in visibility, brings in even ownership as to what is lying at which stakeholder, right? So all of that you've correctly mentioned out. But so there are different types of. So I understand, right? So CLM is a need, right? But for an organization, right? So in an organization's journey, there could be different types of organization. So it could be a smaller organization. There could be organizations where the entire contracts are managed by an external party, right? So it could be a legal counsel, which is an outsourced legal counsel, and in-house there are only probably the proprietor or the founders. And then do I need a contract system? Or there could be use cases where we already have we already have something on Excel and we are managing it. So when do you think, according to you, is the right time to have a system, to start looking for a system, right? Or to evaluate that now is when we need a contract lifecycle system?
Yeah. No, it's as companies, right? I mean, you obviously, for every implementation that you do, you have to evaluate what the need for those implementations. Then again, there are multiple signals for figuring out whether it is the right time for an organization to look for a contracting tool, right? I mean, not every organization, a seed-funded startup might not be contracting. Simplifying or putting in place the right contracting process might not be, the most important thing for them to do, right? So it obviously becomes important at a certain size, at a certain scale, and there are a lot of signals that one can sort of pick up to see if contracting tool is a need for that particular organization, right? And it also ends up defining what type of a contracting tool you're looking for, right? I mean, those signals mean different things, right? So in my view, I mean, the first, I think the most common thing that we've seen is with, at least with companies that we work with, right? I mean, they had a really hard time finding information, right? I mean, so if one has to, search through emails, look up physical files, talk to colleagues, call up your lawyers and counsels just to get information, which is important at that particular point in time, right? So you might be processing a really large invoice, right? And suddenly there's an audit and you have to answer queries of the auditor that, why is the sum in this invoice so, what is the decided upon price? And then when you're looking for that contract, it is some, digitized document in a scanned folder somewhere. So first, you don't remember the file name, that what file name did you save it with? And even if you end up finding it, then you're looking thoroughly inside the document. It might be a 100-page document where you have to find the right payment terms. So if that is happening to you regularly as an organization, where your important contractual terms is something that takes up time for you to figure out, find out, and you're also not very you always have to have multiple checks before you end up using that information. That generally means that it's time for you to start looking for a contract management system, because that one thing that the system would do, a good contract management system would do for you, is to make that information readily available, digitize all of that information and make it really easy for you to then look up and access that information, right? So that's a very, very important signal, right? The second thing that comes to mind is slower turnaround, right? I mean, I have worked in startups before, and I've been running a startup for some time, and even at our scale today at Provakil, right? I mean, the reason why we in-house use a CLM system, right, is because we were at a point where it was just taking too much time, right? So we've been in deals where the entire sales cycle was probably 8 weeks, but the contracting cycle was 12 to 16 weeks, right? It just took so much back and forth between we sharing the contract with our lawyer, the lawyer replying back on some points, we discussing it internally, then we sending it out to the third party, then they reviewing it, they're doing that same process internally, and it just takes too much time, right? And then everything gets lost in terms of people come into the negotiation at different stages, and you're kind of trying to figure out what's going on, right? So if your turnaround times are slow, as legal team, as operations team, if contracts are slowing you down, right? I mean, a contract management system can really improve these turnaround times, can improve the velocity of business, especially for startups in high growth phases. Today we work with quite a few startups. We've recently done a very comprehensive implementation for one of the startups in the real estate space, and just the sheer amount of time and effort that they were putting in their contracts, right, was mind-boggling, right? And the ease with which they now do that process, the amount of time it has freed up is considerable, right? So again, that's a very important signal. If contracts is slowing you down, then CLM systems can really make life easy, right? Large companies missing out on obligations. We've all been sitting in front of our finance teams trying to process invoices where the contract is already expired, and the contract team asking, finance team asking us that, on what basis do you want us to make this payment? You did not even renew the contract, right? It's something that happens at a certain scale in an organization. If you're not using the right systems and tools, being able to track everything that that needs to happen, right? As a business, as I said, right, there are so many contracts that you're signing, right? And just making sure that as the organization grows, as new people come in, old people go, just to maintain continuity, right? And everybody knowing what needs to happen, there needs to be a central system, which neatly records all data, neatly categorizes all data, and then gives you the right updates at the right time, right? I mean, if I need to sign a contract as the director of the company, if my legal head is on leave, it should not be something that cannot happen, right? If it's a system-driven thing, it will happen, right? The system will send me a reminder that I haven't signed this thing. It has been pending at my table for 3 days, right? And I need to, I can't take 3 days to sign a contract. If it comes in, it can be digitally executed. It should be done within half an hour. It should be done within a working day, right? So if you're missing out on obligations, key events with regards to your contracts, that's another very strong signal that there is scope for one to look at a contracting tool, right? Another again, and I think I've touched upon this point, right? I mean, if you're frustrated with how difficult it is, again, I have personally, I've been doing contracts for close to 8-9 years now, and it is especially in fast-growing businesses where and businesses where you might be doing high-value contracts. If you've done contracts, you realize how hard it is to negotiate these contracts on Microsoft Word. You layer on comments. There are multiple edits that happen. You are looking through your email inboxes with threads which could run into hundreds of emails which could run into hundreds of threads, and it is just difficult to find out who commented what, when did he or she comment that, did you get an approval on that, if somebody approved or not, right? And invariably, it's a law of large numbers, right? There are bound to be contracts where you will end up making mistakes, right? Where so again, it takes a lot of bandwidth, thinking. A lot of your time goes into observing these things, noting these things down. And it's just not productive, right? It's not productive time for a lawyer, for a salesperson, for an operations or a vendor management team member to be consumed with contracts, right? And that's what a lot of large companies end up facing, right? Where the teams are just there's so much work piled on because they're just reviewing very, very important, minute details about contracts, and at times you are bound to make mistakes in that regard, right? And then finally, I mean, if you're in the senior management in a company, and if you today don't have a view of your company's contractual obligations, your company's how many vendors do you work with, what are the payments that go out to those vendors, at what frequencies, how many risky contracts do you have, how many contracts do you have in which region? If you don't have a clear visibility into your contracts, then in some way you lack certain amount of visibility into your business, right? So senior management, one of the key things that the system will do for you is to bring a lot of visibility into your operations, visibility into what is working, what is not working, and what are the things that you should be focusing on, right? And maybe it is indicative of where you should be hiring and investing more money, right? So having a good contracting system can really ease all of that out and give you a much broader view of your business. So again, I think that these are some of the heuristics or some of the signals that I would recommend. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There could be more, right? But again, these are generally something that you encounter.
Correct. No, I absolutely agree with your last point. I think I remember, I think when the pandemic had happened, and during that time, everyone was kind of checking up what are the contracts we signed and liabilities, because everything was locked down, right? So I think this is a very good example that if tomorrow, if this situation comes, you would have all of this information on your fingertips.
Yeah, so and I think in the pandemic, there was, I think, the first time when people looked up the force majeure clause, right? I mean, it was a time when there was the most search term in CLM system, right? Where people were looking at what our contractual liabilities are, and in what events do we have a way out of those liabilities, right? So yeah, it's important to have that visibility.
Correct. No, absolutely. I think visibility is the mantra today. Now that we've covered why do you need a CLM, when do you need, what is a CLM, when do you need a CLM? Is there a scope perhaps which one should define, or how should one go about it, right? So let's say I'm an organization, I've established that there's a need, right? Some sort of need is there for us. Some of the points which you mentioned are resonating, right? That either we don't have visibility, either we're taking a lot of time in terms of executing our contract. So as an organization, how should we go about in terms of evaluating a system, in terms of choosing which systems? Because I think when I go out and type CLM, there are hundreds of companies which will come up, hundreds of products which will come up. Now, as a buyer, how do you, or as a evaluator, what are the attributes, what are the parameters which I should kind of scope on, or as to what I need? And then how should I go about in the entire process of buying it? If you could help us elaborate that.
Yeah. Well, scoping is, I think, one of the most important aspects, right? I mean, the success of the tools that you end up implementing, the success of any software that you end up implementing depends on how well you've scoped it out, right? I mean, and scoping is as important for you as a company, right? Internally, for you to figure out what are you looking for, as it is to the external vendor or the company or the software or the product that you end up deploying, right? Because both parties need to really understand transparently what the business is about, and what are the objectives of the implementation, right? So scoping is, I think it's a super critical part of this entire process, and it will define the success or the failure of the product that you end up deploying, right? I mean, and there are multiple factors to this, right? And so for instance, the first factor that if I have to talk about is the nature of your business, right? I mean, what type of a business are you? Are you a large enterprise, or a small and medium business? Are you a consumer internet consumer focused business or a B2B business, right? Are you a manufacturing setup or a services setup, right? So again, classification of your business, what your business is, right? Defining that out clearly is important, right? Because then you will end up looking up systems that talk about those challenges for those type of businesses, right? I mean, so you have to be cognizant of that, and that is one important consideration in my view of first defining what your business is and what type of business you are in, so that becomes an important input into the implementation or deciding on what tool and you have to figure out the maturity of your organization, right? I mean, when I use maturity as a term, what I mean over here is the digital maturity of your organization, right? Now, there could be in contract management today, there are 20-year-old companies, there are 30-year-old companies, there are 3-year-old companies. There are extremely advanced tools. There are very, very basic tools. Within tools, there are multiple plans. There could be a really simple plan for a small team. There could be a really large plan for a very elaborate sort of offering. Now, if the digital maturity of your organization doesn't sync well with the type of system that you end up buying, then it is bound. I think there are chances for failure increase, right? Let's say you buy a really advanced CRM product which is designed for a large enterprise, and you're actually an SMB which is doing where contracting is happening at a breakneck speed, right? Now, what the CLM product will end up doing for you is going to slow you down, because none of your other processes are digitized, and you are now stuck with a really sophisticated, advanced digital process where you might not have the time to do it, or the data that has to go into it is just, you don't have a CRM, but you have a very advanced CNM, right? And it just doesn't add up, right? Because a CRM having so again, it depends, right? I mean, so that lens is important, where you define whether you've just started your digital transformation process, you have been through, you already fairly digitized, and now you're looking to add layers of intelligence onto the product that you want to use, or again, you fall in the middle, right? I mean, you're in the spectrum, right? So that helps you, right? So that gives you guidance on what type of process. What is the size of your contracts team, right? If you are and the size of the team matters, because there are products, there are implementations which will require. I mean, just imagine, right? I mean, a large company like Vodafone, right? I mean, Vodafone globally, multiple businesses, multiple geographies. Now, their requirements from a CLM, they might have a 500, 700 people team globally executing contracts, right? Versus a startup which has a 3 people legal team, right? They don't need the same products, right? So you have to define, that is an important consideration when you're talking to products, when you're talking to vendors, or what is the size of your team, because that also defines the type of product that you might need, right? Scale of your business, right? So, I mean, so how many contracts are you doing every year, right? Every month, right? That you also define the use case that you need from the product, the agility that you need in the product, right? I mean, if you're doing less than 100 contracts in a year, then maybe more important use case for you is a repository, right? Where over time you don't want information to pile up without it, because then you're probably not really concerned about the turnaround times and advanced reviews, because there are probably 3 or 5 contracts that you work on in a month, right? Or maybe maximum 1 or 2 contracts in a week, right? So in that case, the speed and agility might not be the biggest concerns for you. Having a really good repository so that as your future business scales, then you do not have to spend time, right? So again, so scale of your business, the number of contracts that you're doing on a regular basis matters. Then the type and the impact of the type of contracts that you do, right? I mean, so if you are a, let's say a food delivery startup or a cab aggregator where you have millions of vendors and it is the same contract, low in value, very standard terms, versus let's say a large petrochemical business where you are or let's say a large renewables energy business where you're signing multi-decadal contracts of pricing terms and inputs. So again, the nature of those 2 contracts is very different, right? And the kind of system that you might need to support that contracting process might be a bit different, right? One could be just purely give me the right template. Don't need too many layers of approvals. Everything goes into a quick flash where the business teams are able to do it on their own, right? Versus, let's say, a space where the internal legal team, the external counsels, the law firms, third parties, finance teams, business teams, they're all multiple people collaborating. You take time to review those contracts. You extract important information. You detail and note out what deviations were taken, why they were taken. The 2 very different types of products, right? I mean, and so you have to figure out what types of contracts to do, right?
Correct.
Again, and all of this is great, but again, end of the day, budget is something that you have to be very mindful of, right? I mean, you can't be, so while at times your use cases might be fairly comprehensive, but at that comprehensive use case, right? If you end up looking for products which are fulfilling everything, you might not be able to find something, and if you end up then diluting on some of the other elements, right, which might not be feature related, but let's say security related, right? You end up going with a tool where the team is really new, they haven't really done much, they don't have experience. You don't want to be that guinea pig, right? I mean, where they are doing their learning on your behalf, right? On the cost of your business, right? So then aligning your budget, what you can spend on the product, and then defining the requirements, right? So choose few features, the most important ones for your business outcomes, and then make sure that it aligns with your budget. I mean, and again, you do apples to apples comparison, right? I mean, so comparing a self-serve product with an enterprise product on the cost might not be the best thing, right? I mean, and don't be greedy in terms of wanting more, right? I mean, do a thorough evaluation and choose the best and the most affordable product in the segment that you need, in the category that you need, right? But again, budget is important, and don't again. So what happens at a lot of times is, companies end up doing these detailed evaluations, and then finally after months of these evaluations, they figure out that the product doesn't fall into their budget price, and it's a waste of time, right? I mean, okay, so have that clarity at the very beginning of it, right? This is the budget that is going in. Gives clarity to the vendor also, right? So I think that becomes an important thing. And finally, I think what our objectives are, right? I mean, if you should first prepare a document detailing the objectives of these, of why you need the product, what will you end up doing with the product, who the users of the product will be, what are the responsibilities going to be, right? Do that exercise and then go out in the market looking for things, taking demos, right? Because if you start taking demos before you even thought of what your needs are, right? And I'm not saying that you would know of all your needs on day one, but noting everything down, putting it on a piece of paper gives you that clarity of then, because as we talked about in this call, right? I mean, there are so many features, so many companies, so many things out there, right? I mean, and not everything would be good for you, right? So then when you've narrowed it down, then for you to talk to people, only those people who fit in your needs, right? Only those people who are at that level of maturity of what sophistication and maturity you need from the product. Then you've narrowed it down. Instead of talking to 10 people, you end up talking to 3. and then you finalizing the one that suits your needs better, right? I mean, so yeah, so again, these are some of the important things, but again, there are more to what how your scoping should be.
No, fantastic. I think so. Now that brings to the question where, like you mentioned, right? There's so many parameters in terms of maturity, in terms of the scale of a startup, in terms of the budget they have, or probably the possible use case they might have, right? So, is there a sort of a segmentation, or is there a category which you can sort of broadly classify CLM implementations into? Let's say I am a big organization, or if I'm a startup, or if I am, like you mentioned, right, a petrochemical business. So what would a CLM system for a petrochemical business look like, where I have high value contracts, but the volume of the contracts is relatively low, and I have budgets, right? Because the area of the contract which I'm doing, and I'm more interested probably in knowing the risks which are involved, right? So is there a sort of, when I am going to the market, right? So if I see 100 companies having CLM products, is there a sort of segmentation which I can be aware of? And then when I'm reaching out to these companies, I kind of can direct them that this is what I'm looking for. So if you could help us understand that as well, in terms of what factors play and what are the use cases or implementations you sort of see and categorize products in the market.
No, that's important. That's I think bucketing and categorizing things is important. I mean, they're not always the best idea, but in this case, there can be, again, and so while you can bucket, but do be mindful that there could be overlaps in these buckets, right? So none of these buckets are hard distinctions in terms of what the product is, right, and what the product should be, right? But there's definitely basis the use cases, you can easily qualify them into 3 or 4 different types of buckets, right? I mean, so if I were to talk about the first type of bucket, I mean, and which is the most common and the most broader use case, right? I mean, which is, I think, a global use case for every organization which is more than 50 employees, right? Today on the planet, if any company or any organization which has more than 50 employees, they should have a smart repository, right? They should have a detailed contract repository which is designed for contracts, which is specifically focused on contracts, which, so this is for, I think, places where there's limited, business is still in the process of digitization. It's not fully a digitally transformed business. Some portions of the business could be more digital, but let's say legal, right? Because in legal also you're doing other things, right? Or let's say finance, right? Are there systems in place or not, right? I mean, so if you're in early stages, I think going for a very comprehensive tool could be an overkill. You should focus on getting the first layer of digitization done, which is having a repository, right? I mean, and then there are other sort of attributes to this as well, right? I mean, so for instance, the window of deployment becomes smaller, right? I mean, then these tools should be, if it's a repository, then ideally you should be taking about 4 to 6 weeks to deploy this, right? Not more than that, right? Maybe 8 weeks at best, right? Definitely not a year, right? I mean, definitely not 6 months, right? I mean, it's a repository, the tool today, there are, at least at Provakil, we today can implement a repository, a smart repository for you within 4 weeks, right? I mean, that's more than what it should take, right? Here, what you have to focus on is whether the team that you're working with has great data migration skills. How do they talk about data migration? Does the product have the right set of reports and dashboards to look at information, sort of slice and dice information and do it more efficiently? Does it have the mechanism for you to customize the reminders, alerts, and so on and so forth? Basic things, right? I mean, you don't have to have a detailed editor or detailed, negotiation tool, but because you might not be doing the entire contracting within the product, but your core focus is just, making sure that all your past executed contracts and the ones that you end up executing, they're neatly recorded with all the metadata and things into, right? Then I think the next step, and I think this is as your organization grow larger, right? I mean, for large organizations where you have multiple locations, multiple business lines, multiple departments, formal processes in place, and maybe a high level of digitization. So a pointer would be you have an ERP system in place, you might have a CRM system in place. You might have internal communication tools in place, right? And there are hierarchies, there are approval processes, right? It's more driven in terms of the organization is more process driven, right? And then the kind of system that you're implementing is a detailed enterprise product which looks at workflow configurations, approvals, has access controls, offers integrations with other systems, has again, it does the entire contracting cycle, right? I mean, it is not just one thing or the other. It has a great repository, but it also has a great collaboration system, right? Where you should have a rich tech center within the product. You should be drafting, designing the contracts within the product. People should be commenting on it. People should be reviewing it within the product. Multiple, multiple stakeholders should be using that product, right? And it's not just the legal team or the sales team that is using it, right? Now, I think this is the most meaty and the most important part of the contract because the contract management systems, because see, this is where contracts also start becoming very important, right? I mean, because the volume has already grown. The process has become elaborate where things need to be noted down. Templates need to be in place. You can't be signing a different type of document every time you go out to sign, right? You have to run standardization. Standardization is actually the key word here, right? We are standardizing everything across the board, right? I mean, that's when you're looking at an enterprise focused product, right? And again, it comes with slightly longer deployment time frame and higher.
It comes with a lot of. I'm sure there are a lot of integrations also, right? Because larger enterprises would also already have SAPs or probably some sort of equivalent CRMs in place. They would have another process which are detailed out. So I'm sure systems, when we are getting implemented there, that's also a very important part in terms of integrations.
Right. No, absolutely. Another type of contracts, in my view, again, and this is something that, especially with new age businesses and some specific businesses, right? So self-serve contracting, right, where you are doing a lot of contracts. They're largely standard in nature. Doesn't require too much drafting, approvals, review, right? Where you're very rarely you're taking deviation, right? I mean, you're not taking. So in an enterprise system, you're probably every contract, every clause is minutely put under the scanner, reviewed, commented upon. But here, let's say you are again the example of a ride-hailing company where you are, or a food aggregator, right? Where you have again thousands of contracts happening every year. It's practically the same document, right? The risk profile of the contract is low, and the speed matters, right? So everybody in the company. So it is an agile system where you should have mobile apps. The end user should be able to request for a contract. Should not require too many people in the middle to approve it. They should be, if they're not making any changes, there should be. So from a governance standpoint, the principles of what is acceptable is defined. And unless you require any deviation, you should be able to execute the contract without even the legal team getting in touch with the legal team, right? You download the template, or you request for the template appears, you send it for digital signing, the third party signs it, and it's over, right? Nothing changes, right? Nobody gets involved. Only the system, the repository gets updated, the legal gets notified, business teams. Again, integrations is important here. You might you want it to be an integrated, because you're trying to automate things, right? This is from you're trying to drive automation and you're trying to reduce friction, right? So that's the focus of these systems. And again, moderately priced, shouldn't be, probably not as expensive as your enterprise system, but feature rich when it comes to integrations, automation, and things like that.
Makes sense. So I think when you're going from raising Series B round or Series C round, this is where I think you should come about and implement a system like this.
Yeah.
Great. Shashwat, and apart from this, I think, do you feel where, so we have, I think, one of the questions also, I think Maitri has asked that what is the role of AI? It's fairly new concept. There are a lot of tools which are promising. So what is the weightage? So do you feel AI is something which can be in any of these implementations? AI is something which can be factored in. When you're talking about AI, I'm sure there's a lot of buzzword, but what actually AI is going to help? And do you see any sort of implementation where AI is heavily being used?
So I think machine learning and artificial intelligence is going to impact the space very substantially. I still think that we're in very early stages of So again, so this is what another category of contract management systems for me, right? I mean, it's more focused on reviewing contracts where it's not about the process so much than about the uh, system's ability to highlight things in a document. When you're reading through large documents, lawyers spend a lot of time reading them, right? I mean, if a system today we have natural language processing capabilities, right, where you can train models to identify patterns, to identify deviations from your standard clauses, right, and highlight that beforehand, right? So as a lawyer, then when I get down to reviewing the document, this document has already highlighted those 4 or 7 things that I need to answer, right, or need to view. And then it just reduces the amount of time that I spend on the document, right? Because there's so many things which are so. If 90% of the things are standard to what I generally execute, and the system can reliably ascertain that, and then only point me out to the 10% or the 5% things where there could be a potential conflict or potential difference of opinion, and then it just narrows down what my focus should be, so that I can focus as a lawyer on those things, right? So this is something that is up and coming. This is something that we are Provakil investing heavily upon, right? And I think this is the future, right? But again, it's also in context of companies where you have those high value contracts. You end up reviewing contracts in detail. You end up signing a lot of third party contracts where you do not end up signing authoring contracts in house, right? Where there are very few template based executions that are happening. You are let's say you're a law firm, right? I mean, then if you're reviewing contracts on behalf of your clients, right, and clients are sending you those different third party contracts every time, a system that can automate the review process can be really powerful, right? So I think that it's happening in a big way, and there is a lot of investment and a lot of effort that is going into developing machine learning AI based systems for and this could be an add-on to the product, it could be inbuilt into the product, right? And you have to evaluate and see that what your need is, and does it really, again, and don't so again, in my view, less than 10%, 15% of the organizations today can really benefit from for what AI has to offer today, right? So don't make it as the most important criteria when you are judging contract management systems, because a large part of the contracting puzzle or the piece, right, is outside of what the purview for your AI ML systems would do. But if that is your use case, then you definitely have something which is important and something which should be an expectation from the product. Right? It is not something. It is not outlandish for you to be expecting that your product has ML capabilities, uses machine learning models, improves and trains on these models to cut down your reviewing time, improve accuracy, and helps you aid you as a lawyer, right? So yeah, so I believe that's definitely true.
So I think yes, I think AI is useful, but I think it's predominantly from a review negotiation point is what currently we've got systems which can help you around. So fantastic. So I think we've covered in terms of what are the categories of or different types of use cases which we see in the CLM industry, or the implementations which are there. Now, quickly wanted to understand what are the checklists, right? So let's say I have. So we've established the need. We've established what type of use case that is there. There's pretty much a scope which is probably that has been highlighted or that has been outlined by the team internally. So how should one go about it, right? Is there a checklist? Is there Is there a 101 guide for CLM implementation, which we can probably, or probably a framework which is according to you, which probably you see that successful implementations had a similar framework, and then which newer companies, when they're implementing it, they should follow upon?
Yeah, no, checklists are important. I think preparing a checklist, having the right checklist uh, can really improve the odds of success and implementing a good system. So taking the checklist approach would definitely make sense, right? And if I were to talk about a checklist, the first piece is the scoping, right? I mean, where you end up defining the scope of what the product has to do, what business problems it has to solve, what teams it impacts, what features you're looking for, right? And then depending on how you run your business, maybe you're doing an RFP, maybe you're doing an SOW, whatever way for you to scope it out, right? I mean, it's a multi-stakeholder process where you take in the inputs from all the teams and make sure that you have the right requirement document in place, right? Then you have to think about what type of what type of product is best suited, right? I mean, and what type of products are you looking for, right? Are you looking for tools which are designed for small businesses, which do not offer too much customizability, too much support, mostly to be used on your own with limited amount of support and not too many customizable requests. But so that is something that you define out, right? Then you have to identify with your scope. Then you have to identify vendors who who fit into that bill, who fall into that that requirement zone. You have to do demos. We definitely recommend that at least do 3 to 5 product demos, right? That will give you. So what happens is, once you have the scoping done, and when you take demos, it gives you feedback, right? It gives you it gives you feedback into understanding whether your scoping process was comprehensive enough. It gives you a lot of understanding of the broad availability of features and other elements, right? Other elements apart from features, like the implementation support that a partner provides, again, the general support model that they have, how good are they on technical sort of security and reliability parameters, right? So you need to get your IT audits done and things like that, right? And then once you have, you've done demos, you've done those audits, shortlisted people, shortlisted vendors, maybe 1 or 2. If time permits, then do small trial. Right? Give them a small POC, a problem to solve, and use it on a trial basis within your team, so that you're able to figure out usability, you're able to see if the user interface works for you. You're able to see if the product is working as intended, right? I mean, I think it's the generic checklist in my view. Again, people, depending on how comprehensive your process is, you can add more steps to this.
Correct. No, fantastic. I think the proof is always in the pudding. So I think one should go for a trial. And like you mentioned, right? So most of the CLM systems, feature-wise, I think most of the products, most of the tools will talk about the same features. It's when you are actually using them, right? Is when you will realize the tool's configurability to suit your processes, or to understand or probably mimic your processes or what you want to do. And that's just something which you will come to only when you're doing a trial, right? So they're both the aspects, right? Once the tools configurability, the other thing is the service providers understanding, or probably the support which they offer to go in the depth of understanding your processes and then making it available on the system. So you're right. I think trials are something which is a final one should go for during that checklist. So great. I think a couple of questions which we've got in the chat, which are very similar, which you rightly mentioned upon, in terms of both in terms of best practices which are there, right? So one, we see a lot of again cloud-driven digital contracting, but since right, contracts are very sensitive to a business. There's a lot of sensitive information around those contracts, right? So having all of these contracts on a cloud setup, whether it could be it could be either on a cloud or any of the other servers, what is the impact on the security? What is the impact on the data privacy of the data which is there? If you could help us understand that. And thank you, Maitri, for this question. I think this was something we definitely want to cover. Shashwat, if you could help us understand in terms of how secure and safe.
No, absolutely. I think and one of the most important factors that one needs to evaluate in evaluating the right tool is data security, is the technical robustness of the product that you're taking, right? Because contracts are extremely sensitive information. They are they are extremely vital to a business, and making sure that the product that you are evaluating, right? Now you should, again, from an auditing standpoint, there should be certain things that should be given about a vendor, right? So for instance, from a data security standpoint, they should have certifications like ISO, right? I mean, if they are ISO certified, that gives you a certain amount of belief in the vendor that they have those processes in place to enable and ensure that your data is safe, right? You should understand the architecture of the product. You should get your IT teams involved to understand the architecture of the product, and understand how they manage encryption. There should be vulnerability testing done for the product regularly. Those reports should be available to your IT and your services teams to review and then decide whether it fits with your data security guidelines or not. You should evaluate whether in the context of the business that you should evaluate how do you host that product. I mean, are you comfortable hosting it on cloud? Do you need to host it on your premises, or you need to host it on your dedicated cloud? So these are evaluations that you should understand from the vendor fairly early into the engagement process, so that while a lot of vendors could be rich on features, but when it comes to things that are not visible and which are more critical than your features might be, right, they might fail on those fronts, right? So I think that process of identification of finding the making sure the reliability of the product is as per the guidelines. And again, and as legal, you might not know, right, of all of these things. So the best thing to do at that point in time is to get your IT teams involved and make sure that they're stakeholders in that process of identification. If you have a checklist, then having them following this checklist. I hope that answers.
No, absolutely. I think that does. So yes, I think the scoping is done once you've got a checklist. I think the best practices to implement, generally, which we've seen, are around having a detailed deployment plan. And this, which comes to the question, right, Shashwat, which Trigunayat has asked. So what exactly generally should happen in the deployment plan? And Trigunayat has a similar question where it says, if they were to implement a CLM, what about my existing contracts, right? So in what stage do these existing contracts also come in the system? And then, which you earlier also had mentioned around data migration, right? So if you could help us understand in terms of that, do they become a part of the CLM, or they are a separate, they will still remain in my folder? And
so I think that is, I think, at least for larger organizations which already have a lot of contracts in place, right? Finding a vendor which can help you migrate all of your pre-existing contracts, right? I mean, contracts you've already executed, right? And they could be in different shape and form, right? I mean, they could be digitized, they could be physical, they could be in a folder, they could be in an existing CLM product which is not fitting in your needs, right? And so you should evaluate whether the vendor has the capability, right, to migrate all of that data. Neatly tag that data. So let's say if you only have scanned documents, then how do you extract data from those scanned documents, right? How do you create a repository then, right? Because see, if you already have 3,000 contracts, right? As management, you will not be able to use the system for quite a long time till so having the next 50 contracts on the platform will not be as important as having the last 3,000 which are in place, right? So data migration support is critical, is crucial. Not a lot of teams can do it well. So make sure that that is another important factor for evaluation. And again, as I said, right, security. And if you're a large enterprise, right, if you're a fairly large size company, then I think support, migration support, and implementation support, and security, data security and confidentiality of your information. Those I think are two of the most important factors, and that will, out of the 10 vendors that you find in the market, is going to narrow it down to 2 or 3, right? Only 2 or 3, 20%, less than 25% of the vendors would be able to even meet some of your guidelines, right? Because those are two very important and very hard to do things, right? Support is really hard. Security is really hard, right? Because it's not featured, right? It's what happens. It's how the thing works at the back, right? Back end. Nobody sees it, right? These are the invisible aspects of your system which have to be really, really robust.
Right. Oh, no, fantastic. Shashwat, which brings us to the question in terms of the system is implemented. Now, what about post-implementation, right? So I think if you could help us understand and also cover what are the pitfalls, right, which you see in the market, or when we also hear stories when we are interacting with bigger companies who've already burned their fingers in terms of implementing a system and then spending a lot of time, effort, resources. So what do you think are pitfalls around it from a post-implementation point of view? And how should one go about it in terms of ensuring that they are not falling on those traps, or probably ensuring that these things are not happening with them?
Yeah, so again, so I think largely from whatever discussion we've had, right? I mean, we've covered most of, the things that you should be doing, right? Best practices and how do you evaluate, right? I mean, and the pitfalls are, if you end up missing a few of those things, those are the kind of pitfalls in my view, right? I mean, so for instance, if you don't have clear goals of implementation, if you haven't really sat down, decided what are you trying to do, why are you doing it, who is going to do it, who's the person in charge, uh, whose key responsibility for that particular quarter or that particular business cycle is it, right? If you don't, I underline those things, I don't give it that much importance, it is very difficult for you to get any tangible outcomes of the product, right? I mean, and we see that a lot of times, right? Where while teams, because they're so busy, right? Legal teams, they want to implement systems, but then they will not give enough time to scoping, customization, deployment, right? And what happens is then both the vendor and the company struggle. And end of the day, you're at a point where you put in the time, but you're not happy with what the product is, right? Because it doesn't really capture what you needed, right? Because you did not spend enough time on it, right? So that is something that both parties, both the vendor and the company, right, both have to be. So if you find a vendor who's now, after the sale is done, then suddenly is not taking as much interest as they were initially, then that's a red flag, right? And again, it applies to the company as well, right? Scoping and implementation is very important. Again, also one thing that we see often is price becomes a very important consideration, sometimes the most important consideration, and I think that generally is missing the woods for the trees, right? I mean, it's like being penny wise and pound foolish, right? I mean, you end up giving too much priority or too much importance to the price, wherein you're running, let's say, auctions and stuff, where again apples and oranges are being compared, and people who know they don't have the best product for your needs end up outbidding good products. And so give it importance, have a balance between so before you narrow it down on the price, make sure that it's better not to have a system than to have a bad system, right? So just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's going to help you, right? I mean, so have that fair balance between quality and price. Support model, I've talked about it enough. I can't emphasize it enough, right? You should have, if you're a large organization, if you're implementing an enterprise system, you should have dedicated account managers. You should have pre-deployment support. You should have deployment support and post-deployment support, right? And the team should help you design the business objectives well, implement them well, and then during the course, help you manage changes, issues as they come, right? Because end of the day, it's a business system. It will require upgradation. It will require, it's a dynamic system. It's not going to be a static one, right? And then security, right? I mean, if this is something that could go horribly wrong, right? So if you're a small company and you don't have the resources, then again, we are happy to share a guide on what are the important elements of technology that and security that one should evaluate, right? But security is the most important aspect, and contracts is going to be one of those systems for you where you need the product to be super reliable, super secure, right? So whatever rules are in place within your organization, make sure those are there, right? And finally, buy a product which is configurable, because what happens is you end up, let's say, buying a system which is set up for your use case, but your use case as a business keeps changing over time, right? Your processes might change, your templates might change, right? Your you might just say, your large business, you acquire a new company. How does that get assimilated into the system, right? So configurable, so it's a system which is specifically designed for you.
Yeah. So I think so. Larger point is being having configurability in the system, because like Shashwat was mentioning, it is very much important in terms of once the post support, right? So you'll implement a system, the system will go live, right? But 6 months, the businesses are dynamic. You might come to know that there's an additional field, or probably the workflow might change, or probably as an organization, you might end up acquiring a new company in the interim, right? So then everything changes. So the system also has to be dynamic, right? Or it has also to scale up as per your needs. So that's where the configurability comes in, right? So as a software, the software vendors all in the market would always say that everything is possible, but there is always a caveat, that possibility with how much time, right? So a system where you see that it is configurable, all of these major things they themselves are able to do, is something you should check for, because all the processes change, right? And then over a period of time, your process might also change. The tool should be configurable enough to kind of take it up and make it available. I think we just lost Shashwat. He seems to be back. Shashwat, can you hear us?
Yeah, hi Swapnil. Yeah, there's some issues with my internet, so but
no problem, no problem. Super. I think we've pretty much, Ashwat, I think we've covered the last point which you were harping upon, was configurability, which we cannot stress enough, that post implementation, that becomes such a big point in terms of having a smooth journey for a organization, and then ensuring that all of their needs are getting met. All of that comes under configurability. We can quickly take a couple of questions around it, Shashwat, in terms of post implementation, right? That once we've implemented, one of the good questions I think Manish has asked is around what are the metrics one should gauge in terms of the performance of their contract management process, right? So what are the factors one should look for? So that's the first question. The second question is also similar question, which is around more from a review point of view, right? That when you are reviewing a contract, what are the risk points and around obligations? So if you could help us understand both these questions, right? That how the system can help, and what are the parameters one should look for when they are gauging a contract process?
So if I understand correctly, I mean the first one is around metrics, right? You want to understand.
Correct.
So if I would talk about some of the metrics, right? I mean, so from a system standpoint, when you're deciding which system to sort of implement, some of the metrics could be how much time is it going to take to deploy and things like that, right? But if, let's say, when you come to the system itself, what should the system be providing you as metrics, right? So the system should be able to give you usability reports, that are your users really using it, right? I mean, how many users are logging in? So you should have some metrics around usage. You should have some metrics around turnaround times, right? So you should have metrics around how much time is it taking for your contract in which stage, right?
Correct.
And what types of contracts are pending for longer, which stakeholders are taking longer time to review. So that gives you clarity on right. And then some of the metrics are again around the product reliability, right? So you should measure downtime. Your vendor should be providing you those details, right? that if your system's not usable for a large amount of time, that's a red flag for the system. In some of the other metrics that you can measure within the product is the system again is around reporting and dashboards, right? I mean, you should have detailed reporting and dashboards by contract type, by upcoming renewals, by contracts by region, by business type, and so on and so forth, right? So again, those are some of the thoughts around reports and metrics.
Great. Superb. And I think the follow-on question which Manish had was around risks. So what is the response a legal team should have if a risk is pointed out or if there's a contractual obligation which is being met, right? So more around collaboration, more on obligation. If you could help us understand how should one go about managing the risks in the contract as well as the obligations.
Right. Now, so see, from a product standpoint, what your product should enable you to do is, like, it's a end of the day, a contract is a document, right? Now, your product should have the capability. One, I mean, if it uses some amount of machine learning automation to create metadata, right? So there is data inside the contract, right? There's data which is probably subjective information, which can probably be categorized. So let's say if I'm setting a contract repository, I want to know how many contracts do I have where I have unlimited liability, right? Now, that might not be a data point that is captured initially in the contract request, but that's definitely a data point that should be your system should be able to answer, right? How many contracts are there where we have an international jurisdiction, right? It's not in my it's not in my local jurisdiction, right? So things like these, the system should be able to record. If you are using a basic system, then you should have the capability to record some of this information along with the contract. But I think in some of the advanced systems today, the kind of ones that we're working on, these things become an automatic pickup from the system, right? So the moment a document is uploaded, a Provakil system will be able to categorize its clauses and tell you, whether there is a deviation from what your standards to that clause is, right? So it could be around jurisdiction, liability, and lock-in, and a number of risk factors that are there in the contract. And the system should then, based on your governing principles, should give you a dashboard where those risks are clearly visible, right? I mean, so it should give you a risk index for a particular contract, right? I mean, how many risky points in this contract, right? If you are taking, if you're signing a contract where some of those risk factors exist, then there should be explicit approvals to those deviations that should be there in the system, neatly recorded, right? And that's what you can do from a system standpoint.
Great, Shashwat. I think that's fantastic. I think meanwhile, I think we've got Manish. Thank you. Manish is saying thanks for the answer. So great. So I think if there are any questions, do drop them here. I think we've overrun time. We've also got a link which is posted in the chat section where it's a detailed CLM guide which you've got, which basically details out whatever we spoke about and what are the factors and framework we should look for. We also have, in case you want to get into much details about what we've got to offer, right? So all of these things we spoke about, what pitfalls you should avoid, what systems you should kind of take, what process you should take. So you essentially should look for partners. We are a very good partner at Provakil. We've implemented CLM systems now close to with 20 plus organizations where we now detailed understand what are the requirements, what are the possibilities, how to deploy them. So in case you want to know more about the system, feel free to, there's a Calendly link which is dropped. Feel free to book a half an hour, 15-minute call with us where we can walk you through in terms of what is there, what people are doing with tools like these, and how it can impact and help your business, right? So great, Shashwat. I think that was it was an enlightening session where I hope for everyone is able to declutter the entire CLM or the contract implementing and what to do after implementing, how to implement it. So if you have any parting thoughts, feel free to kind of add here.
No, I think I enjoyed talking about some of these things because these are recurring conversations that you end up having with a lot of legal teams that you work with, right? And I think we at our level we are trying to structure this information, make sure that we put out a guide. People can go out and download that guide as well around around this. So how do you, what factors go in? So again, it's crystallizing some thoughts here, and so we are doing a lot of work around contracts, and we want to be in that space where we can keep adding value, we can keep bringing more knowledge and more information around, and more education around some of these technologies and how they can be helpful. And that's been our endeavor, and I hope people found it useful today, right? So, and we'll keep continuing doing more sessions around this. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I think I hope you guys enjoyed the session, and we'll come back with new webinars soon.
Great. Thank you, everyone.